Welcome everyone to the Music X podcast. It's an extension of the Music X newsletter, which is a weekly newsletter published on Substack, where we discuss advanced technologies and innovation in the music industry. We offer insights, strategic advice. The reason we started this podcast is because Gareth Deacon, hello, Maarten Mulleven, that's me, because we have a lot of conversations around these topics that don't make it to the newsletter.
Yeah, usually fueled by you being very receptive to an early morning call after I've drunk a litre of coffee and have an idea that we want to talk about. And actually, at some point, that tipped over into we should actually just basically record this or find other people to talk about with these topics. So I think that brings us very naturally here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of podcasts out there that have all these extended conversations. The podcast we're doing with Music X is structured around themes related to the advanced technologies and innovation that we care about in the music industry. And then we try to bring different voices in, people with different backgrounds, to find different perspectives on how the implementation and the strategy around these technologies and this innovation can actually be done.
I think also they're not interviews, right? They are conversations through discourse, like ideas come forward, right? And exploring those ideas like in conversation with people is like super fascinating.
Exactly. Our first guest is Michael Pelczynski. The first theme is artificial intelligence. Mike has a long history in music, especially around innovation in monetization models, business models. He was the architect of the user-centric model that SoundCloud introduced. And now he is with Surreal AI, working on at the attribution layer for generative artificial intelligence. And he's chief strategy officer at VoiceSwap, where they are talking about new rights that appear through artificial intelligence tools.
Yeah, I mean, that whole idea, like the whole idea of nil rights, so name, image, likeness in a world of AI, and like where that's expanding what our definitions are of rights, let alone whether or not the rights frameworks that we have are the like fit for today, but like what does it look like in the future? I mean, all of that starts to come up. Mike talks at length about the experience and the point of view of building those models when at SoundCloud, and that's fascinating looking back, because that was a midpoint in streaming's evolution as opposed to happened at the beginning. So like doing that now is like is super interesting.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the main takeaways from the conversation is about trust. It has different layers and levels to it, right? It's the trust about two people, and then there's the trust between companies, but also between governments and startups, and how that can help shape the introduction and you know the way that the infrastructure around certain advanced technologies is being done. Yeah, we should just probably dig in, or is there another highlight you want to give, Gareth?
Trust, Bon Jovi, us potentially all recording a single together.
Yes,
like,
there is that.
It's all in there. It's
all in there. We are talking about Bon Jovi. I go red when we do this. You'll have to watch it. The song, will we ever produce it?
Yeah,
we'll find out.
Let's do it. Really excited for today's conversation. We have a great guest. Mike, you have been a fascinating voice in thinking around business models around music and how we think about building different forms of remuneration and models that align better with incentives of various actors in music. And that's through streaming before we ever got to AI. So like now, like I am super excited for the conversation we're all going to have, where we sort of start unpicking some of this. So Mike, why don't you kick us off? Why don't you give us a little bit about who you are, like where you see yourself fit within the context of kind of AI and the conversation we're going to have today. Over to you.
Sure. Yeah, excited to be here, guys, and knowing you both quite well. I'm expecting this to be enlightening and also fun.
High bar. We have a high
pressure.
bar.
No, this should be good. And thank you for having me jump on. It was, I guess, the thing that's really interesting about this time right now is it feels a bit full circle. because it was about 23 or something years ago or whatever, I came into the music business side, and it was through new media business development at Warner, where I was there for a relatively short period. But it was when they were even ideating ringtones and putting it to market, and how the industry, the traditional side at the company, wasn't really supportive, but they were just putting this into the market at hockey sticks. The hockey stick was short lived. But at least it was this moment of seeing, oh, okay, this is an interesting sector of the music business, and then went traditional rights, royalties, licensing. So now here we are with the AI era, and it's interesting because you take all the baggage with you into the AI era. And it's again, you take all the complexities and things that we have that are gaps and rights and business models and the need for them. So it feels, I don't know what the word is, but it's just like right place, right time, but not sure how we're going to solve it, and all the work in streaming and pushing against boundaries and trying to figure out the best way to do it after the fact. Similar situation, trying to figure out how to do it after the fact on the music generative side, which I'm involved in through a company called Surreal. So I'm heading licensing efforts there and industry development. And then on the other side of AI is Voice Swap, where I'm a co-founder, which the lanes are much more clear, which is also exciting in a very different way, because you know where the rights are, you know how to work it commercially and how to try to build that business while getting everyone comfortable culturally to adopt the technology, which is usually, like anything, it starts with utility, right? But anyways,
Well,
before
yeah,
diving too much into, yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I generally think we don't talk enough about ringtones and the fantastic business model that was around it when we talk about music and music rights and licensing and monetization. But the most important part of the ringtone business was that people just wanted to pay for it, right?
Yes.
So if you think about the utility, they just wanted to hear something cool on their phone, even though it was like shit quality. They were ready to just like, okay, I want this song that I like as a ringtone, so I'm going to pay €2, $2, whatever for it. Do you think that is even translatable into what we're seeing now with artificial intelligence, generative or not?
Absolutely. And I think this is a great point that you bring this up, because the opportunity with generative music in particular is that people are requesting something. It's not, I'm going to show up to a buffet of music and consume it, and someone's going to compete for my attention for that. It's transactional. It's exactly what you're talking about. The opportunity here is to make music transactional, amongst all the on-demand streaming that, subscription businesses that we rely on, that has its own strange competitive market share dynamic, right? Like it would be very healthy for everyone if we could figure out something that's not as expensive as vinyl and not as, strangely inane and, niche as some of the other transactional things that exist, but something like this where it's kind of straddles the listener, fan, music aficionado side and the creative artist side, because if you're using this technology, easily can straddle both, for inspiration, aspiration. There's so many potential applications, but it's just, well, no one's getting paid.
That is the fact. So, like, framing that, then, I mean, this might be too reductive, but then do you see some of the opportunity then in a similar way that ringtones were, in thinking, is the mental model like this is another format, for want of another term, and another revenue stream, certainly, or certainly a consumption stream, because I guess what we're talking about here is like that. I'm a music consumer of some sort. I want something. I want a ringtone for my phone, or I want to be able to go somewhere and create a song or a beat or whatever else it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say it's more what you described. It's maybe another way of putting it. Definitely another revenue stream, but I'd call it another arena of music in terms of format. And I think that the challenge here was even a few years back, seeing the beginning, my time at SoundCloud, we saw some AI generative strange content coming in, and strange can be, all flavors of strange. Some of it great, some of it just questionable. And it actually, I don't know where we're going to jump into it, but it was really when we saw the vehicle of fraud, streaming fraud, be these pieces of music and content, right? It's this AI generative content that we started seeing years back. It was curious because it was one, where is this coming from? What's the actual use of this? And right now we're only seeing the use of it, potentially to use it to generate streams and revenue. But to your point, there's two thoughts that came to mind with the team that I was working with at the time. I was like, one, this proves the use case that we have to reform streaming and how we pay it, because it can be, and that was about 4 or 5 years ago, where it was, it was the first sign of the flood coming, like the substantial flood coming. Because if I could click a button and push something anywhere, that was already the big warning sign. And then the other side was, to your question, what if this actually became a thing in the years to come, that people started making this music or this format that became its own arena of revenue, that, we no longer have to worry about it flooding, say, streaming. So I'd say it's two-part. It's almost, it's a chicken and the egg, because even if you figure out and stabilize and create this arena, like for generative music, it's still going to flood streaming. Or you fix streaming, and so it's almost the hopeful mission at the time was, let's fix streaming while we know this is coming in several years, so that the discussions and debates and negotiations of fortifying this arena for generative music wasn't muddled down with the crisis of, but this is gonna, if we do it like this or that, it's gonna affect streaming. Like, that's always the thing, right? Everything right now is in defense of market share, but then you don't really give the opportunity. It's actual means to figure out what the heck could that be commercially. So definitely, I mean, it's already, you see it, Sunos, Udios, and others. People are paying mostly subscription based for token based economics, but that's still token based as transactional. With top ups, you guys know this, and like, so there's something about, I think the interesting way of framing this too is, music is such a consumption based thing. We listen to it, we find it, we discover it. It's consumption in general. This generative AI thing is more of an influence based business, or influence based format, where it's, I'd like to create this influenced by A, B, C, and maybe D all the way down to Z. And that becomes something very different. Like, the value of that IP or artistry is different there. Like, it's inspirational based on what it's trying to help you create, where music, consuming it has so many functions, and either has utility because it's helping me fall asleep, or it's something to cheer me up or make me feel better about being incredibly depressed, or it's just aspirational, inspirational. There's a whole cacophony of things there. But the generative AI one is so interesting because it's still so nascent in many ways, but you hear these cases of people, what they do with it, either for sampling, novelty, like the three of us are going to go drive somewhere and have a trip. We're like, oh, let's make, a couple of songs because it's about our trip. We're going to go get, I don't know, buffalo wings, upstate New York. So it's
we have a song about buffalo wings. Yeah,
we are making this song. Right. This song is going to get made now. Nice, it's done.
It's a buffalo wing, Buffalo, New York, in the style of, I don't know. Is there a band with buffalo in it? There's got to be. I think there is, but I can't think of them right now.
Don't know.
Grant Lee Buffalo. You weren't far off. There we go. Done.
Yeah, there we go. So again, there's novelty in that, and the audience of that is an audience of 3, but we were willing to pay for that, just for that novelty, and everything that we reference in that should get compensated for that. because it's,
Yeah, so
it's again,
I
yeah,
think that's the interesting part of what you're saying here is in a lot of discussions, people say, okay, we have to think about the input or we have to think about the output.
yeah,
But basically what you're saying is always just think about both, right? So you need to
yeah,
license the input, which is happening, and then we need to figure out how to fix the output as well.
yes.
So it needs
And
both.
it needs both, but if you have to focus on one, I would I would say to focus on the input, because then if we're only focusing on the output, again, it's limiting this entire opportunity, because it's at the detriment of just looking at another broken system. It's saying like, but this is going to affect the broken system on the output way. So we're not going to give it a chance. If we think about the input side of it, when that gets solved, that becomes a different scenario, because then you start looking at the output side that you also need to figure out. There's less pressure on that because someone's making money off of the input side. Like I really do believe it's going to happen. I'm just the thing that I'm nervous about is the transfer of wealth the more time passes. And in speaking with decision makers over the past, I'd say a little bit over a year on the generative side, it's alarming because a year has passed. There's significant time has passed. The transfer of wealth hasn't really happened, but culturally people are much more comfortable. Like it went from fear to concern, and now people are split between concern and curiosity. And it's just like, the little, by the end of the year, it's going to be different again. Like you both know this. Like it's just, we can't say, oh, we don't know what to do here. We're going to wait and sit on either being litigious or policy or both. And the old playbooks won't work this time. That's the other thing, is someone saying, we're going to flat fee. We're going to put those fees so high. We're going to get this in there. We're going to get a 2 to 3 year runway to get reporting and understand what's going on from a business intelligence perspective. But unlike all those other relationships, Facebook, Metas, and all those, and YouTubes, this is not about consumption. This is about competing with what's actually being created. And then to your point, the output. And on the input, I might not be needed anymore as a rights holder because I've been trained on, right? Like, so it's a different game to play that, that old way of what past deals in history.
I think that it's fascinating, right? That we started this conversation with a conversation around the output and like examples of where, like consumer demand, for want of a better term, like basically drove things. And then to the reference point you made there is like, the general curve of adoption or the level of comfort, certainly with these kind of tools generally, regardless of whether it's actually, how much people are actually doing meaningful things with them or just creating just more and more stuff that's just, cluttering up like servers somewhere. But it's interesting we come back to that bit, which is much more around the output. And I guess one of the things I'm fascinated a bit about is we do, like you rightly say, like are focused on that lesson learned, it seems, from the last wave of big platform shift, where get the input right, and that's some of the way we fix the pathways that make sure people do get remunerated, right? But then at the same time, I guess I sit and think, like, does the idea of like the, I guess the outputs and what outputs look like, how do you balance creating an environment where there's an opportunity for people to innovate and create different things that meet people on their terms in terms of making stuff, and don't become something that gets boiled down to being really reductive into like one thing? Because one of the problems we've had with streaming was that thing of like, it became really narrow, right? It got really tight, really narrow. And what you're seeing in some ways now is it's sort of exploding again. And you paint a picture of a world where people are potentially interacting with music from people they love and like for different reasons than just I push a button, I turn it on because I want to hear stuff, right? And and I wonder how do we do that? Like who are the people that, and how do we think about like you building systems that allow for that to happen? Is that possible, or is there always a tension between those two things?
I think that's actually the solution and possibilities, and the technical possibilities is usually it's honestly the rule of chance, right? Is there a startup out there that's already working on or has worked on or developed the means to do a piece of the bigger picture of whatever that new format frontier is? Or if there's something already out there that has almost a whole chain of needs technically. This disruption of AI has affected so much media and so many different avenues of creative industries that it's very difficult to solve it because every industry's complexity is different. Like when music is there voicing our situation, we're thinking of very particular things that you just touched on, right? Like how our media is consumed, what the rights are, the complexities there. We approach it differently than, say, the newspaper media or, say, TV and film. And the real solution here is there's startups that are developing or have already developed the solutions that we need to bridge that gap, to start to have the technical means to do something. So like one key one for us in music is attribution. White box is attribution proper. From the outside, we would call it attribution likelihood. And it's created this scenario of what's been really interesting in the policy world is that there's an apprehension to work with startups. And that to me is fascinating because historically speaking, Spotify was a startup, right? You could go down the list of everything. That was a startup at some point, whatever we're talking about. So to me, it's almost like there's this strange, unlike 10, 15, 20, whatever years ago, it's this sentiment that people turn to the big companies and say, do you have something yet for us? And if you don't have anything yet, we're going to wait until you just grab something and you just gobble it up, and then you have a solution. Like there's this interesting redirection of faith, maybe I put it, in like the technological space that I'm not used to seeing since 20 whatever years ago, 25, 3 years ago.
So where does then if you want to like put your finger on the nerve, where is it?
The dynamic is a trust and control dynamic. Everyone's kind of having this existential moment of being, we need to move here, but we can't. And why can't we? And, bucketing them into two pieces. One half is business is not comfortable having these kinds of relationships because they're not used to. Or it's, our infrastructure is not prepared for this. Well, why? And then they really have to have a hard line finger pointing session of this is wrong, this is not up to par. And quite honestly, usually it's both. But, one of them ends up being more of a reason that they're not able to move forward.
I was going to ask you that point, and I think if we're going back in time again and thinking again about other waves of this stuff that we've seen as a model, the landscape looks really different, right? You've got loads more independent actors in the space than you did of varying sizes. Lot longer, like the long tail is way longer, and individual creators, UGC, like all these other things. And I certainly, when I think about like that end of the spectrum, like definitely given the last wave of like digitization, the business models, etc. To your point about trust, I think that's really interesting because I would argue there seems to be a fairly significant lack of trust in terms of like how the collective nature of deals could and will and should get done. So I'm interested. So like on the side of like maybe we put a pin in and come back to like the kind of operational readiness piece and what we've learned and where do we go. But like in that bit about trust, like how much does that issue of like kind of legacy issue of lack of trust internally as us as an industry prevent us being able to move forwards effectively in the context of what we're looking at?
So trust, actually, jumping to voice swap is the reason that we've been so successful in comparison to other companies in that space. And trust is the key thing. I could give you examples where there's a very large independent label that we recently closed a deal with, and we're doing private voice models for their artists. And many of them are quite known, and we're doing it for servicing utility. Radio spots, other things, eventually songwriting networks and all these things. And someone was trying to create a private model, and their legal team is going through the agreements. And even though it's a private model for some of these companies, they still take that data, the audio, and they still use it to enrich their base models. That's not private, right? That's not, there's a secondary use to that. And that goes back to trust. If you create a vocal model just to create one piece of utility, you're going to get one utility out of it, and everyone finds one. But by doing that, by creating a vocal model, you're doing something else at the same time, and you're establishing a source of truth. This is the only place that a vocal AI model exists of my voice. Therefore, if I find it on another peer platform, I find a recording utilizing, a nefarious model. If I find any of that in the ecosystem, I have the legal precedence to take that down and challenge it because I actually have the technological source of truth for that here. If I don't have it, that's much more loose. That's just basically, that shouldn't exist there. And it should be like, well, why? Why shouldn't that exist there? Right? There's many reasons why, because it was scraped, it was done this way. But if you have
this kind of stuff fits in the history of like Holly Herndon, Imogen Heap, Grimes, and all of that stuff, right?
Where we're trying to establish the standard of how you should look at this new real estate of intellectual property, because that's what it is. It's passive income. It's highly dependent on how a platform monetizes it, and like why we took our time in focusing on how we monetize it, which is at every point of inference. Every time you and I, the three of us are, playing with a demo, and every time we keep swapping, what if it was a male vocalist? Let's try Chuck Roberts. That's too gravelly and deep. Let's try a female vocalist. Let's try Ruth Royal. Like, she's got a really great, drum and bass overlay vocal, and, this and that. And then, oh, wait, that fits. And through that exploration, each one of them gets paid, right? You get paid through the work. And then once we're done and the three of us are, wow, this is great. Let's release it into the world, right? And then that's a different monetization. So everything, again, this goes back to what you guys said before. There's the input, the output, but there's also, if it's a new arena, it's like, I would actually cut the line at, okay, here's new revenue that we can generate, and then here's into the current industry and ways of monetizing. Because a lot of them that you mentioned, Martin, was like, they all monetize this technology when it goes into streaming and all I would call now traditional forms of making money in music. We've been obsessed with, let's create new revenue, and then the additive is the way you make money today. Because that way you create that, new revenue means new IP, which means those artists, and there was a handful of them said, oh, wait, I can go back to my partner, whatever it is, label, publisher, manager, whoever, and they could say, oh, wait a second, I have more rights now that they're probably interested in. It's really expanding the value as we're trying to solidify a new arena of revenue, an industry, while we're kind of, and what you guys are both touching on is we're also at the same time walking backwards to all the problems we have today, right? And that's where it's interesting, these larger institutions having these existential moments being like, oh, wow, we can't really jump right at this because these things aren't really up to par. We're not ready on metadata or rights or...
Feeds into the input piece, right? Of like starting at the beginning with the end in mind, I guess, is the framing, right? Right. And to that point of like, in this case, the artist or like the creator as that start point, right? And Genesis, as opposed to the recorded work being the start point of Genesis, right? That tension you bring up there is like super interesting because that point of like, if I'm an artist and I start with creating, like the licensable asset, right? Which is a thing because, there is an argument if you peer at down the other end of the Suno telescope and you squinted really, really hard of going, actually, if they wanted to actually license all this stuff, could they have done it? And two things. A, could they have got the agreements? And B, could anyone have given them the data in a way that it would have been possible for them to do and build the thing that they do, right? And that's not to say it's right or wrong, but it's like if you look at that question in the cold light of day going, well, no, maybe we weren't ready, right? Like as an industry, right? Like because, and like that's a fascinating question to start like giving us a kind of sunlight's best disinfectant conversation about like what are we supposed to be building and how fast. One of your earlier points, like how fast are we building it? To your point of what's happened in the last year, and has it happened fast enough? I think that becomes like a really fascinating conversation to start unpacking.
It's actually, you touch on one thing that's really interesting. If we magic wand this and say all of a sudden the music industry has willingly adopted and created a scalable, real-time, licensable business with generative AI music. And I'm talking, go ahead, scale it to your heart's content. Consumers can go crazy in terms of generating what they want. We know the business model will capture, all the scalability and everything that's happening. The infrastructure is ready for it, and it's in real time, which also means we don't have to play Cold War games when it comes to renegotiating our license after 2 years. I know that crap too well. And then the nebulousness of deals make it even more complex because the relationships are all over each other's toes and stepping on each other's faces. But if it's a real-time thing, that's interesting because I'll have a lot less licensing work, but there would be a lot of other work to be done, right? Because then you blow up this thing. If people care about it, fine. That will balloon, that arena of revenue will balloon. Streaming might diminish and become a radio play. And then there's something else to build out. But you would bring up a really good point, is that we're already prepared to do something else that requires that technicality of being able to do something. Sure, you could go scale the heck out of this. We can calculate and figure out who to pay, and we'll be able to know what's happening with each other in real time. Like that could just completely open up so many other avenues that we haven't even thought of. It's just that rigidness, it has to in some way die out because you can't gatekeep the way, like what you described. What if they approached and said, hey, we're going to be building this technology. Can you give us your catalogs? We have to figure out how to build out this whole technology. And then usually the business would say, sure, I'll give you 0.1% of my catalog for the value of 100% of my catalog. And then maybe we'll do this, but like if no one cares about you or you'll burn out your money and die and I don't care, right? Like that's going to have to change.
One of the big issues that you're kind of talking about is the problem that there's so much tension between all these various things, right? So you have the input, you have the output, you have the licensing, you have the copyright, you have power dynamics, you have all these different things that are influencing basically all our decision making in this, whether we're a startup, a rights holder, a musician, a label, et cetera, et cetera. But you've also been at the forefront of doing this work already with SoundCloud. So if you can look back now to when you started reimagining the licensing model for streaming at SoundCloud, is there anything you think like, hey, I could have done that differently to influence the outcome and, make it more palatable or create earlier adoption or any of those things that you probably would have wanted?
Great question. I think I would have made it more public. Is the answer. I think I would have made it more public because the thing that, it's funny, a friend of mine, colleague who we worked together, I call it the second phase of that. The first phase was just building the model and then launching it, which was worth two strokes. And then the second phase was then when we launched it with all the direct creators was, okay, so what do we do with the rest of the industry and the majors? Which was then like what you just said, taking this thing that we built in a very particular situation because most couldn't do that based on the licensing structures. You have to. SoundCloud is a very particular beast. I mean that in a good way. But to go then to the majors and other larger industry stakeholders and say, hey, we have this idea. Me and Matt Young, we basically were thinking about this and we were really like, how do we get a major stakeholder to say, well, why would I want that? And what comes with that? And I wish we were much louder about the superfan proposition that we came up with, which, everyone's jockeyed that for a good couple of years now, which came a lot from we pitched and went very aggressive with it because and it was all, of course, not in the public view of this, but what it was we're going to change how we pay. We're going to change how we pay on SoundCloud, treat us differently. The way that people behave here is different. User-centric is just so much more naturally in line with how people use SoundCloud. Would it work on Spotify, Apple Music, and others? We don't know. Probably not. Who knows? But it really was conducive from like a DNA perspective of SoundCloud user at large. And then the natural thing was, what was interesting is because if I'm paying on the populace's behavior as a whole in a given country, I'm looking at that whole thing as an ecosystem, and that's my business. But if it's every single individual, that means listener individual behavior is more important, and that means that I can find fan affinity much easier. And not only that, all I have to do is follow the money. I don't even have to find trend data. I don't even have to so this is where me and Matt were just really ideating this, and we were like, you're fattening the head. You're doing a Pareto score, right? It's going to be 20% of people making 80% of the revenue. And that's when we really ideated and came up with the incentive that if I had this proposition in my two hands and I say, here's user-centric, it's actually going to make you more money or the same amount in some instances. And some people made a little bit less. But I'm going to give you this in my right hand, which is the data to see the individuals that are generating the most revenue for you. This is your fan economy in my other hand. The specific things that we were lucky about is that SoundCloud idealized Google in the beginning, and they tried to mimic them as much as they can, the founders. And it was the one benefit of that is the entire royalty system was bespoke. It was built in-house. Problems with that? Yes. Over the years, they had to refine that repeatedly over and over again, but there was no dependency. So when I came in 2017-ish, I was blown away because it was like, wow, we could do some, the economist part of my brain was just like, this is so exciting. We could maybe do something with this. We treat every licensee, so even an individual creator, they are a rights holder. That's not how it works on the other platforms. There has to be a third party that runs through it. And that was the beginning of this whole thing that then eventually when this fan economy idea came out, who can deny that? So I think to your question about this, it's more complex in that way because it feels more foreign, because it's us creating content in ways that we never could imagine. But at the same time, and the culture of fandom has existed forever. It's not, that wasn't a novelty, but it was hilarious though. I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years later, seeing some of the verbiage coming out of publicly traded companies and what they were saying, and they were the ones that were the least happy about what we were doing. So I think where we are right now is it requires more creativity to figure out what this is, because there's less of a cultural standard around how we create music. But the people that know are the creatives, are the producers and songwriters, the ones that have already been toying with this for a little bit, for a good minute. I think the general answer here is that we need the culture to shape itself around the technology first, for the business to see the signals, to go, oh, okay, that's how we would use that and exploit it in a commercial sense, And one really interesting to add to this is, whenever doing deals or licensing with the digital, core teams at larger companies, they're usually saying, have you aligned with the creative side of our company? Especially on the labels, have you talked to the A&R folks or the label folks or anyone? Because even if we negotiate a deal, they have to we baton pass it to them, and it lives or dies there. And what's really interesting here is that we've gone, and they've understood this, we've gone the opposite direction. We've had the first conversations, you go as far as, you go, and then the creative A&R sides are the ones reaching out saying, hey, we'd really love to do this, or what do you think about this? Or we're trying to ideate, be really creative about this technology here. And then it solidifies there. And then you go back to the digital team. And it never operated that way. which is super fascinating because it's like it's almost even rearrange that relationship if you have the trust. What Gareth you were talking about. If you have the trust, if they're like, all right, I can call you if something goes off the rails, Mike, and it's like, yeah, sure, whatever, Don't put it in the news.
So to that point then, is your sense then to that point of it changing to the way it was before, right? Which I guess, like my kind of sense was like it went slow and you kind of built the template and then everything fit a template. And if you didn't fit a template, you went on the kind of like, we'll get to you at some day pile.
Exactly.
Right. And, But like if is your view that actually that's shifting?
I'm finding where I'm actually putting my respect that I didn't expect it to be put more and more, like week to week. Like there was a head of a digital team at, one of the largest companies, and we had a 15-minute catch up. And this person just said to me, he's like, you know what? Like, this is a great idea. We'd love to pursue it. Honestly, take the keys on this. And if you could find one of our artists that is comfortable with this, please come back to me. Like, just find the artist that's from our camp. And just make sure they have, they're one of our artists that has a good, healthy audience, and then we'll take it from there. And like that, I respect that person deeply for that, because there's been, historically, it's always been very guarded, never show vulnerability, this old mobster business way of approaching things, like feel very guarded. That was just this way of like, it's a respectable way of saying like, I got what you need. You probably have what I need. Like if you find one of our people, just come to me and then, and I don't remember having anything like that for a while. And definitely not when it comes to like the technological side of music. More like if you find the songwriter, bring them to this and publish, like that's a normal thing, but not in terms of,
Do you think that's because there's an acceptance of, amongst quite a large swath of people that we just don't know how it works?
Back to the voice swap thing. It's like, Dan Stein, DJ Fresh reaching out to someone and being like, I think you would really benefit from this. Like, we take care of you. How do you feel about this? That's different than those people's record label or publisher or whoever reaching out to them and having that same conversation. So it's this really, there's so much of a trust dynamic now that it's fascinating in one way. There needs to be a trusted technology, and that happens in steps. Like that the voice side, almost all artists start with private models, and I completely understand that, because that's when they see the magic trick, right? I'm going to do this. I'm uncomfortable, but my partner manager is saying, let's do this. We're going to save time. And then they see the, thing happen, and they're able to do something that they never thought they could do. And then it just blows their mind, and they have the voice model there, and they could do something else with it. Like we did a thing with Pitbull where there was a single he had from last year where there was activity in India for the record, and they, one of his people on his team, they reached out and they were curious about it there was a tech conference in Miami that he like walked on the stage onto this record, but it was, we hired an Indian rapper. He translated his performance in the track. It was a Bon Jovi song that he featured on. So I'm more of a Bon Jovi fan, if I have to admit. I'm from Jersey.
It's fine to admit it.
Yeah, come on.
You're amongst friends.
Come on.
It's all fine.
I've seen you guys at weddings. I'm sure you guys are gonna. There's a Bon Jovi song that hits, and you're gonna.
Air guitar all the way.
Thank you. Sorry, Dead or Alive. That's mine. Anyway, so Martin's embarrassed. It's okay, but it's so there's something going on in India. We hire this rapper. He translates, does the performance. And then we apply the technology, and then all of a sudden, Pitbull's performance is in Hindi.
Being able to use this technology to create these sort of transformative moments that otherwise just couldn't happen, right? I mean, you could get a guy up there like as a pastiche doing covers, right? But like there isn't a way to do that, and you start linking that to, other technologies and thoughts about like other creative things we can start to do in different types of arenas or virtually, and like all these other things that start to open up from doing that. It's it's fascinating at the possibilities.
The thing that's really interesting about this example, though, it's also very music focused, meaning that there's many companies that, say, oh, well, we can just translate the vocals and the language, technologically without any other human interaction. But this is meant to be, I'm going to show you a performance, right? I'm going to sing or perform or rap or whatever it is. And Gareth, I'm going to show you what you would sound like with this idea I have in my head with your voice on it. Like, that's the difference, as opposed to being, let's translate you to this other market. I'm going to push a button.
There's something collaborative and creative about it, right? Which is interesting, because you get that sort of creative output as opposed to this. Like, I think it's fascinating, and we're going to have to wrap up, but like, it's fascinating because so much of the push for like developing at speed with AI generally, like bigger picture, is all about how do you do more of stuff faster and more of it, as opposed to that, right? Like that idea of like, and it does feel like we do have a choice about how we work with and do things with technology. And it's really fascinating when you talk to like artists and creators, because they make those choices with technology all the time and always have, right? It's just like, it's just not in the public arena as part of the conversation more often than not when we're talking about AI, creativity, music. It's quite a thing.
I think maybe that creativity sits in the intersection of everything else that we spoke about, right? It's the connective tissue between input, output, between the licensing models, the business models, and if we can keep that creativity centered, then maybe that's the big takeaway, right, from this conversation. It's like, hey, then we can take some steps.
Absolutely.
And find the models that kind of fit that creativity instead of having it done the other way around.
I think that idea of collaboration between all those things is a great place to end. Mike, we could have gone for days. So we're definitely doing a round 2. Like, if we're doing that round 2 over beers somewhere, maybe that's it. Otherwise, we'll do another official round 2. There's loads more things we could have discussed. Thank you ever so much for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation. Much appreciated.
Appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks,
both.
Mike.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Take care.
You too.